large mansions, boardwalks and cable cars, San Francisco was then the capital city of the West. It could boast of such amenities as the Velocipede Training School. Muybridge was the best-known photographer on the Pacific coast. This is a trade cart he designed for a steel rolling mill. Under his trade name Helios, he took his wet plate chemicals and dark tent to the Yosemite Valley.
The series of views were taken by the indefatigable and untiring Helios before the great railroad belt that binds the Atlantic with the Pacific was completed. They were also made by one with a true artist's eye and feeling. To photograph in such a place is not ordinary work.
As an official photographer of the United States Survey Department, he traveled everywhere. These are Indians in Western Canada. And others from Vancouver Island, probably taken on a trip to Alaska. Later, he was to photograph the last-ditch stand of the Modoc Indians against the United States Army.
I must say the partial success I have met with must be attributed to the extraordinary rapidity and wonderful depth of focus of the Dallmeyer lenses. I have more than 60 lenses in my equipment and have used them exclusively within the Arctic Circle and under the equator, with exposures varying from 18 hours to less than the 2,000th part of a second, and must candidly confess I cannot afford to use any other.
But while Muybridge was becoming famous and struggling up yet more snow-covered mountains in search of new views, his young wife was left at home. She probably made up this album. For her, there was more glamour in stage actresses and the local theatre critic Major Larkins, as we hear from the Calistoga Free Press, October 1874.
On Saturday last, Edward J. Muybridge, a well-known photographic artist in San Francisco, by means of letters which fell into his hands, made the discovery that his wife had been on terms of criminal intimacy with Major Harry Larkins. Frenzied over the discovery, he immediately made his way to Calistoga and learned here that the destroyer of his peace was at the Yellow Jacket mine. Alighting, he knocked at the door. As the Major opened the door, he called out, "Who is it? I can't see you." Mr. Muybridge said, "Good evening, Major. My name is Muybridge, and here is the answer to the letter you sent my wife." We are informed that there was talk of lynching Muybridge at the time of the shooting, but this act of violence was not put into effect.
After a dramatic trial, Muybridge was acquitted on a plea of justifiable homicide. So in March 1875, he was bundled off with his camera to Central America while things cooled down. His photographs were commissioned by the Pacific Mail Steamship Company.
The object of the company was to stimulate commercial intercourse and at the same time to gratify the tourists and lovers of the picturesque with a glimpse of the wonderfully beautiful scenes that have hitherto remained unexplored.
The skies, which are a feature of Muybridge's landscapes, are in fact a bit of photographic faking. He used a whole repertoire of cloud studies, an unusual subject for that time, to fill in dead skies in his landscapes. And this moonlight scene on the Pacific is not quite what it seems. A genuine night shot is this exhibition building lit with the new electric light. Another demonstration of his skill was the astonishing 360-degree panorama of San Francisco, which he made in 1877 on his return. With the camera on a tower roof at the top of Nob Hill, each of the sections took approximately 15 minutes, with a 40-inch lens. A local paper reckoned it showed the homes of more than 250,000 people. It is the best view of the old San Francisco before it was shattered by the earthquake of 1906. Leyland Stanford, the railroad tycoon. Muybridge's association with him was to be a turning point. In May 1869, Stanford had driven home the Golden Spike, holding the last rail to link the Atlantic with the Pacific. He summoned Muybridge by telegram, as he had a problem which he felt could be solved by high-speed photography. And he had come to the right man. As this photograph taken in a Mexican bull ring with a wet plate shows, Muybridge was already a master of the instantaneous photograph. Stanford wanted photographs taken to settle the controversy about the exact movements of a trotting horse. In 1872, Muybridge had succeeded well enough to satisfy him, and on his return from Guatemala, he renewed the experiments at Stanford's ranch in Palo Alto. All we have of their first trials is this painting based upon a photograph, but in 1877 and 78, further research was successful.
On one side of the track, a large screen is placed, set at an angle of about 20 degrees from the perpendicular. Powdered lime was sifted over the track in front of the screen, so as to make a perfectly smooth white surface, over which the horse was driven. On the opposite side of the track from the screen, a low shed was erected, open in front, and on a bench or table were placed cameras numbered in order, so as to take views 21 inches apart.
The stereoscopic cameras had simple drop shutters.
In photographing a running horse, fine black threads were placed across the track, 21 inches apart, and connected so that the slides cut off the exposure of the camera at the instant, so that the photograph was taken without any blur.
For trotting horses, wires on the ground were tripped off by the sulky wheels. By 1878, Muybridge had 24 cameras recording pictures with exposures of as little as 1/1000th of a second. Results were astounding. The unimpeachable evidence of Muybridge's photographs, revealing conclusively for the first time details of the much debated actions of horses, brought the photographer instant and universal fame. Recorded the foreshortened views which baffled artists. Pictures like these were published in scientific journals all over the world.
There is scarcely any branch of animal mechanics which has given rise to more labor and greater controversy than the question of the paces of the horse. I'm impressed with Mr. Muybridge's photographs published in the issue before last of La Nature. Could you put me in touch with the author?
The speaker is Maray. The study of movement in horses and other animals had long been his preoccupation. For years devoted himself entirely to medical engineering. His sphygmograph for recording the pulse directly onto a graph is the first of its kind anywhere. He is credited with the invention of the cardiograph, and some of the earliest methods of recording blood pressure are his. In some of his early experiments, Maray's instruments were activated by compressed air.
The experimental shoe has a ball of India rubber filled with horsehair and attached to the hoof. When the foot strikes the ground, the India rubber ball is compressed and drives a part of the confined air into the registering instruments. On the question of birds in flight, I have devised a gun-like kind of photography for seizing the bird in a series of attitudes which impart the successive phases of the wing's movement.
Maray lived in the Burgundy wine country, and the peasants were amazed by his antics. A man who constantly took aim but never fired, and never had anything to take home for the pot. Small sensitized circular glass plates were slid into the firing chamber from a light-type magazine and rotated by clockwork. Here René André shows how it was used.
The weak point of the photographic gun was principally that the inertia of such a mass, which continually had to be set in motion and brought to rest, necessarily limited the number of images. The maximum was 12 in a second, and these had to be very small.
By the early 1880s, Maray had also taken images superimposed in sequence on a single plate. From photographs like these, he had sculptures made to show the movement in 3 dimensions. Maray also favoured the idea of a zoetrope to animate these images.
One could see all animals with their true movements. It would be animated zoology. So far as artists are concerned, it would create a revolution for them, since one could furnish them with true attitudes of movement.
But Muybridge went one better. When he arrived in France in 1881, he brought his sensational new machine, first shown in 1879.
The author arranged in consecutive order on some glass discs a number of equidistant phases of certain movements. For example, a horse making a few strides of the gallop, or a group of galloping horses. Suitable gearing of an apparatus constructed for the purpose caused one of these glass discs to revolve in front of the condensing lens of a projected lantern, parallel with and close to another disc fixed to a tubular shaft, which it rotated in the contrary direction. To this instrument the author gave the name of zoopraxiscope.
To us, these first moving pictures look primitive, but with the aid of modern animation, we can see why the demonstration in Paris was a sensation, as Maray tells us.
This took place in my house in 1882 at a reception where I'd managed to gather several eminent personalities from French science. For these learned men, it was a revelation. We were struck by the absolute accuracy of the various positions of which we had not imagined until that moment.
The press was ecstatic.
By the aid of an astonishing apparatus called a zoopraxiscope, but which may briefly be defined as a magic lantern run mad, with method in the madness, became mobile and beautiful.
Was so great that it caused a split with Stanford at his outdoor laboratory in the Bois de Boulogne. The white box contained the camera and could be moved on rails. Photographs were taken as a man in white moved against a black background. Chronophotographic images like this fencer are significantly different from those produced by Muybridge, where only one action is shown on each plate. The sequence of positions on Maray plates, each phase of movement superimposed on the previous one, produced a kind of simultaneous imagery. This was totally out of keeping with traditional preference for clarity of contour and form. No wonder later artists, like the Surrealists, were enchanted by Maray's chronophotography. Another method used by Maray. A model dressed in black with white stripes and spangles on the limbs was photographed against black. The figure itself became a running graph. And here's the same man walking. This schematic image may have been suggested by Muybridge's photographs of a horse's skeleton posed in a sequence of movements. Maray, a chronophotographic portrait with a flexible rod. For the cartoonists, the work of Muybridge and Maray produced a whole new imagery of movement, which is still with us. Apart from the gun, Maray's first chronophotographic cameras had been for fixed plates. but by 1887 he had designed new cameras using rolls of sensitive material. The intermittent mechanism and the rotating shutter enabled them, when cranked at speed, to take 10 to 60 pictures per second. Exposures varied from 1/500th to less than 1/2000th of a second. These were the first true cine cameras. One of Maray's film strips. About 1900 he ran some remarkable experiments in aerodynamics. Though these have been called the first wind tunnel experiments, they were carried out in a sealed glass-fronted chamber with a black velvet background. This is the model for it. Into this, threads of smoke were introduced under pressure. Illuminated by magnesium light, the jets of smoke shooting past the obstacles reveal patterns of turbulence. These photographs once more perform that dual function of serving science and enriching art. Maray himself was only interested in analysing each separate image. His assistants had to wait until his back was turned before projecting the moving pictures. Muybridge's greatest triumph was realised between 1883 and 1885 in Philadelphia. There he threw body and soul into a massive photographic project, creating some 100,000 images of every conceivable movement. For this he used as many as 60 cameras, which were electrically synchronised, recording each fraction of the movement from 2, 3 and even 4 positions. By 1895, Louis Lumière had perfected his cine camera, and the whole world, including Maray, was within its field of view. As early as 1888, Muybridge had prophesied the future of film.
Instruments will be constructed that will not only reproduce visible actions simultaneously with audible words, but an entire opera will be recorded and reproduced by an apparatus combining the principles of the zoopraxiscope and the phonograph, for the instruction and entertainment of an audience long after the original participants have passed away.
Muybridge himself escaped the cameras, but here for posterity is Dr. Maray with his photographic gun in 1901.